Sorry for the long story, but I can't figure out this person's motive. One night I was in bed with my boyfriend. It was about 1:30 AM. I get a text from a random number saying, "Is this?" and then my name. Sorry for messaging late and out of the blue like this, but I don't think then saying my boyfriend's name is being honest, and I need to talk to you. We exchanged a few texts, and basically they were accusing my boyfriend of cheating on the both of us. Obviously I was annoyed, but bear in mind it was June 2020, bang in the middle of coronavirus lockdown in the UK. We'd spent every day together since March. He denied it all and insisted he didn't know who this person was. The same number starts texting him, angry text, calling him a lying rat, not looking good for a boyfriend. But this is where it gets weird. This person gives no specifics. They won't tell me their name, what my boyfriend has done, only that he is a liar and that I was an idiot for believing him. I'd ask, but they would just reply with vague, angry texts. Their grammar and spelling was good, but they'd use slang words from our local area. We assumed it was just some kid who found our numbers off Facebook and was having a laugh, so we just ignored it. Then nothing, until my boyfriend gets a text the following afternoon asking him to meet at the local social club for some company. Me and my friend got straight in the car and went down there. No one was there. The club was closed because of COVID, but we couldn't help but feel like we was being watched. It was really weird. A few days go by and the same number starts texting me again. This time the text language is weird. It's like spelling mistakes and saying stuff like "why you too" instead of "you too," that kind of thing. It felt like it was a different person texting me. They seemed a lot angry with me now because I didn't believe them straight away. Then they text me, "You're so dull. I see him leaving your house earlier, LMAO." Cocky, I said something funny like, "Where's my house then?" And then they replied with my street name. They also know things about us, like the fact that he was in the army, but I guess you can figure that out from social media photos. I called them loads, but it would just ring twice and cut off. I tried switching the number on WhatsApp and on a few social medias. Nothing. Only on Instagram, the number would come up with a location of a film company in Rattle, Netherlands. When I googled the number, its provider is Tisme. I have never heard of it, but it looks like it might be a fake number. Never asked for any money or anything like that. Don't get why someone would go through so much effort just to wind us up. The last text I had was, "Okay, you'll see eventually, LMAO." Creepy. Any advice, please? I moved a lot growing up. By the time freshman year of high school came around, I had moved 7 times or so, and was about a year and a half into my most recent move. I had a pretty close group of friends in middle school, and we all went to high school together. I met him through one of those close friends. We were in band together, and even though he was almost 4 years older than us, we welcomed him into our group. Sam was easily twice my size, tall and heavy set, and originally kind of intimidating, although I was never afraid of large men before him. Lesson learned. I kind of had a bad home life. I spent as much time as I could at school, sometimes hanging around the school campus until 6 or 7 at night with a friend group. 3 of us lived in the same direction, and we would walk the half-hour trip together until our paths split. One slightly colder evening, Sam offered to walk me home since the others had already gone home. I just thought he was being a gentleman. He mentioned something from a previous move when he lived in California. He didn't walk a friend home and something horrible happened. He left it at that, and I let him walk me home. We got a lot closer after that. We bonded over living in California and exchanged numbers. He would message me late into the night about his depression and self-harm, and I wanted to help. A few months later, he tried asking me out. It was this big romantic gesture. He learned a Disney song and the ukulele and sang it to me in the cafeteria. But I was already dating someone, and when I turned him down, he got angry. A freaky, quiet, twitchy kind of angry. I felt so bad. I started seeing him everywhere. We were still friends, we still hang out in groups, but I would pass him on the street, walking somewhere, and a few minutes later, I'd see that he changed direction and had started to follow me. He would walk me to classes by following me in the passing period at a distance. I started to minimise the group time we spent together, and he would follow me more. I had friends meet me at each class and walk me to my next one because I felt unsafe. He knew where I lived. Then he started to talk, not to me, but to mutual friends about one girl in California who he tried to walk home. At first, she just shared my name, some crazy coincidence. Then she had the same brown curly hair and blue eyes, and every time he rambled about her, she became more and more like me. And then he said what happened. Over literal weeks, this fantasy evolved. They were walking home, and they were jumped by some guy with a knife. It was a robbery gone wrong on her birthday, January 24th, my birthday, and she died horribly and couldn't react in time. She bled out in his arms. Sarah, who had brown curly hair, blue eyes, and my name, my birthday, and sounds just like me, bled out in his arms. Each retelling added more and more detail, and the guy with his sick fantasy about my death would follow me around and knew where I lived. My boyfriend was abusive, mentally and physically, but I stayed as close to him when I could, whenever I could, because if the worst happened, I knew for sure he could throw a punch. I never felt safe at school or in our little town, walking from home in the dark. One day, at school, he had a breakdown, freaked out and ran out of the school in a panic. I was sent after him and found him curled up on the floor. I got closer. I knew about his anxiety and depression, and my safety aside, I wanted to make sure he was okay. It was then that he told me about this horrifying story that I'd been hearing from mutual friends with added details. We had been walking home from a concert in California. We passed a dark alley and a homeless man came out with a rusty knife and asked for anything valuable. I fumbled for my phone. I didn't have anything else on me, and he thought I was calling the cops. He stabbed me. Once, twice, and again. Sam stood there, horrified. He saw red and grabbed a broken glass bottle near my body and attacked some homeless man. He killed him with his own knife. He told me he killed someone. My stalker had killed someone. It didn't matter how messed up he was anymore. I didn't care if it was fantasy or real. I didn't care how it would affect his mental health anymore. I wanted to go to the police. I was scared for my life. My friends convinced me to go to the school counsellor first. That morning we went and told him everything. The stalking, the stories. How he admitted to murder and that he was the reason they moved from California. How I was afraid for my life and wanted to call the police. My counsellor didn't take us seriously. She went to the principal, and the principal, not mental health expert, called Sam in to talk about the accusations. The principal then informed me that he didn't think that Sam had any kind of mental illness and that I wasn't in any danger. And that was that. I lost faith in adults, gave up on going to the police, stayed with my friends walking me between classes, hiding behind my abusive boyfriend, and looking behind me every step of my walk home that year. The counsellors ended up gaslighting us to the point where it feels like a fever dream now, and I would think it's made up if it weren't for my journal entries recording the events and my growing panic, and the similar stories from my friend group. Just for some clarification, I don't think anyone actually died in California. I think he's a pathological liar, and that he was so deep in a fantasy that he convinced himself it was real. No, I wasn't physically hurt, but it was emotionally scarring, and the threat that he posed to me was 100% real. Hello, I'm French, so I apologise in advance if I make any mistakes. As I said, I live in France, and this story happened to me this summer, just after the lockdown ended. I was, and am still 19. After this lockdown ended, I went to my grandparents to spend a few weeks. I got tested before, and no problem there. My grandparents live in a small city in the north of France, and they have a dog who's quite big. When I was really young, I lived at my grandparents for a year, and at the time, the dog was only a puppy. Her name was Chippy, in French, which kinda means little devil in English, but in an affectionate way. Considering when I was living there, I played with her a lot. We were both really close, and this will have its importance later. Two of my hobbies are having long walks and running. Thus, every evening, I was going out for a long walk with the dog. There's a track that follows a path through the forest. Then there's a small hill, and on top of that, a big place with lots of fields. I run there a lot and I know the place. The air's fresh and the view's quite beautiful. So I was going there with the dog every day. It was also helping my grandparents to have her doing lots of exercise. The first time we went there, nothing special happened. We just enjoyed our walk. It's about 6 or 7 kilometers, so basically an hour walk. The next day, when we arrived on top of the hill, in a field, it was probably around 10 PM, but there was some light because it's summer. There were 3 other people walking in the field. They were younger than me, probably 15 or 16. I also noticed they were smoking, so my guess is that they used to come here so they couldn't be seen by their parents. We went past them, and I greeted them, and they greeted back. Once again, nothing special there. For a whole week, I did this walk around the same time, 10 PM, and passed those 3 guys with nothing special happening, and it was perfectly fine to me this way. My second week, as I usually went for a walk with the dog Chippy, and arrived at the fields, there was only one of the 3 boys. He wasn't smoking this time though. When he saw me, I was at the entrance of this field just after the little hill climb, so the entrance of the forest was just behind me. He did a sign with his hand to catch my attention and asked if I had a lighter, which I actually had in my pocket. I told him, yeah, sure. So he walked to me, hands in the pockets of his hoodie. When he came near me, for some reason I felt a shiver. It's crazy how sometimes your instincts know there's a problem, but you don't listen to it because nothing looks weird to you. I handed over the lighter when he passed by. At that moment, my dog was staring at him. Then everything happened really fast. He did a really fast movement with his hand, coming from the hoodie, and I only saw something shining. I just had a reflex of throwing myself back, so hard that I fell down actually, and I then realised it was a knife that he was holding and he tried to stab me. What saved me is my dog, God bless her. When she saw the guy trying to stab me, she jumped up on him and he fell down. As I said before, he's a really big dog. I immediately got up on my feet and heard something from behind me, from the entrance of the forest. I saw 2 guys wearing animal masks running to me. They were probably the 2 friends. In this kind of situation, your brain just acts for itself. You don't really think at all. It's just a case of the answer was found and it was really simple. The other guy was still on the ground. I just watched my dog and told her, run. I started running and she followed me. But I heard the worst possible thing from the guy who got up. We'll catch him. Don't let him go. At this moment, I was totally terrified. I was just running and running, and I was hearing them running behind me. I was only thinking, how long are they going to follow me, and who the hell are they? This was the time I was really happy to be a runner. I was clearly better than those guys, and that totally saved me, because they chased me for something that felt like an eternity to me. Fortunately, at the end of the field, there's another entrance to the forest, and this time it's a descent to the end of the road. I heard the steps of 3 guys vanishing as I arrived at the end of the forest, though I didn't stop running until I arrived at my grandparents' house and locked myself in. I caught a massive breath and gave her a huge hug. I saw in her eyes that she totally understood what happened, and I've never been so happy to have her in my life. After that, I told everything to my grandparents, and we called the police, but they didn't find anyone. I really don't know what these guys wanted, but the animal masks make it seem like it was some kind of satanic ritual. I really don't want to know anyway. I still do long walks with Chippy, the hero dog, but I now go earlier, into places with a little more people. I hope you enjoyed my story. Again, I apologise if it is a bit all over the place. I'm French and my English isn't great. And to the 3 guys in the forest, let's never meet again. Hey folks, I'm kind of new, and this is my first story I've submitted here, so let's get started. I must clarify, this didn't happen to only me, but my uncle too. This was after a Christmas Eve party, and when everyone went home, I decided to stay because my cousin and I were watching a movie. My uncle, who used to walk his dogs in the woods next to a park, went off to take them out. Before this, my aunt told him not to do that because it was too dark out there. It was around 4 or 5 AM. He didn't care much, and he went off anyway. My aunt was still worried, so I went along with him. Everything was quiet. My uncle and his dogs were having a relaxing walk as usual, and I wasn't really paying attention to the surroundings, when suddenly the dogs went still. This wasn't that strange. They always stopped in their way to stare or bark at other animals, like rats or birds or insects or other dogs. However, this time it was different. When the dogs went still, my uncle and I noticed something was going wrong. The dogs weren't angry or curious, they were kind of nervous, anxious and afraid. One of the dogs, the largest one, was growling and shaking. As my uncle started to get worried about the situation, we heard it. People in the woods. We didn't see how many because of the darkness. They were saying something.
We all gather here by the blood of...
Then we couldn't understand.
We...
Then we couldn't understand again.
Thee and I.
And then we couldn't understand again. As my uncle and I heard that, he yelled for his dogs to follow him out of the woods. As we all left, he turned his head back and he only saw the slight movement of the branches and shrubs. Perhaps because these people were trying to hide. After all that happened, he hasn't walked his dogs near those woods, nor will he do it again when it's dark. So to the strangers in the woods, let's never meet again. I currently go to a large university in Philadelphia, and my school isn't in the greatest part of the city. I'm a senior now, and I've learned to just sort of keep my head down, and most people in my area will just leave me alone. The one exception that I've had to this was my freshman year. My roommate freshman year was an absolute madwoman, stealing my stuff, threatening to physically assault me, and spreading rumours about me. I generally tried to stay out of my room for the most part, just to avoid any interaction with her, until I was able to get a new roommate the next semester. As a result, I spent a lot of my time at the library or at friends' places. A few weeks into my first semester, I think it was around early October, I was hanging out at a friend's place. He lived on the other side of campus, probably a 15-minute walk from my dorm room, but my path from my room to his dorm never left campus. I had been warned prior to moving into my dorm room that campus was the safest place for students because the locals generally stayed off campus unless they were grabbing food from a food truck. Keeping that in mind, I really didn't mind walking back from my friend's dorm really late at night since the path was well lit and the only people I saw there were students. Regardless, it was getting late and it was a weeknight, so I told my friend I was going to head out. He offered to walk me home, but I declined and I'd be fine, which was my first mistake. The walk back was perfectly fine up until I got to the block that my dorm building was on. For context, there was another empty dorm building on the block that I lived on. It was scheduled to be torn down later that year because there was black mold everywhere inside. But at the time, it was still standing and were absolutely no lights outside of it. There was a courtyard beyond the building, which I used as a shortcut, which was my second mistake. As I entered the courtyard, I used my phone as a flashlight to kind of guide my way through the space. As I was nearing the other end of it, I heard someone call out, "Miss!" Obviously, my first thought was, nope, and just kept walking and pretending I didn't hear anything and picked up my pace. But the voice called again, "Wait, miss!" At this point, I was nearly out of my courtyard, and there was some light coming from the windows of my dorm building, so I could kinda see what was going on without completely relying on my flashlight. I turned around to see who had been calling me out there, which was my third mistake, and I met with the man. He looked so ordinary, except for his oddly wide smile and the fact that he was carrying a rather heavy looking trash bag. "Hey miss, I have something for you." Nah, I'm okay. I need to be getting home." "No, I think you need this. Let me show you." He opened the trash bag and reached his hand in. I didn't know what to expect, so I bolted. I ran further from the courtyard and towards the ramp that led up to my building, thinking I could outrun him, but I was sorely mistaken. Despite the fact that there was about 10 or 15 feet between us, as soon as I turned, his hand was around my wrist. "Miss, I have something for you. I really think you need it." Feeling trapped and unsure of what to do, I sighed, defeated. I hoped to God that someone would look out their window and see what was going on, or someone else would be walking back to the building at a late hour and see us. I wanted to scream, but I was scared that if I drew attention to us that he would do something that would make me really regret trying to get help. Again, not the greatest part of the city. He smiled at me, like he knew I wasn't going to try and call out, and he let go of my wrist. I didn't realise how tightly he was gripping me until he released it. He took a step back from me and reached into the trash bag again. My heart was pounding and I wasn't sure what to expect, but it definitely wasn't what he pulled out of the bag. It was a clock. An old digital alarm clock. The thing had to be at least 20 years old and it was encrusted with dirt, like he pulled it out of the junkyard. I was stunned at the sight of the yellow and orange plastic. After I realised that he was actually trying to give me the clock, I thought it might have been a bomb. "Here, this is just for you." Oh, I really don't need one. I've got a clock in my room. I gestured towards a massive building behind me. This one's different. What the hell? What's that supposed to mean? Miss, see this one has a radio. Pretty unique, don't you think? I bet yours doesn't have a radio function. He smiled. I mean, mine didn't, but don't most alarm clocks have radios built into them? I took a step back from him, but as I stepped back, he stepped closer, mirroring my movements. He reached out, presenting the clock to me. I took another step back. He took another one forward. I knew my back was literally going to be against the wall of the dorm if I took another step back, and I wasn't sure where to go. I felt like I had no choice but to go against everything my body was telling me to do and just accept the clock. I reached out and noticed that where he grabbed my arm was already bruising. With my hand now outstretched, he placed the clock into my hand. I felt so dirty having it in my hand. I don't know how to describe it, but it just instantly felt like I had just finished rolling around in dirt. My arm felt like it was throbbing with the clock, and it was so heavy. It felt like it was getting heavier with every passing second. I knew it just felt like that because I was freaking out, but it didn't make this experience any less terrifying. I didn't know what to do. The guy was still smiling at me. I just blurted out, "Thanks," span around, gripping the clock. I took a step away from him towards a ramp leading up to the building, and he took a step back. I decided that was my chance to bolt for the door. I spun around on my heels and took another few steps before hearing, "You're so beautiful, I love you," called out behind me. I turned back and the man was out of sight. I screamed. I didn't know what I'd just got myself into, but I didn't want any part of it. I sprinted towards the door to the building, dumping the clock in the trash. I still thought that there was a decent chance that it was a bomb, and if it was going to explode, I wanted to do something to contain it. Nothing came of the man, or the clock, other than the bruise on my arm. It healed within a few days, and soon after, I'd forgotten about the incident. I think I just repressed the memory, and didn't want to unpack what I went through. I still try to not think about it, and the only reason I'm writing this now is because one of my current, non-crazy roommates had brought it up a few days ago, and the floodgates of my brain opened, and I felt like I needed to share what happened. I just want to say, when all this happened, I was 18, and I was young, innocent and naive. Now that I'm in my mid-20s, I would never have let this happen. It was my freshman year at college, and as one could imagine, I was excited to be on my own for once in my life. So excited to be on my own, I decided I was going to take summer classes on campus. That way I wouldn't have to worry about coming in when the big crowd of freshmen came, and I would already know where everything was. Plus, it meant I could get away from my parents faster, but mainly all I could think about was boys. You see, I had never dated anyone through high school, so I thought I'd find my one true love at college, because of course that's what all the movies told me. About 2 weeks go by, and me and one of my roommates, of which I had 4, were hanging out in the lounge area, showing off pictures from our Instagrams of our families and friends. Well, my roommate, we'll call her Tracy, showed me a picture of her and these 2 guys. One of the guys was Tracy's boyfriend, and the other was Tracy's boyfriend's best friend. I'll call him Sean. Now, Sean was very attractive, and I told Tracy that he was hot, and she told me that he went to the tech college near us and he was single. Now, a day or 2 goes by after this, and she told Sean that I was interested in him, and he wanted to know if he could follow me on Instagram so he could DM me. And at the time, I trusted Tracy because she seemed like a cool, chill girl, so I excitedly told her yes. I wish I'd never told her that. I talked to Sean for about a week before I was comfortable enough to give him my phone number. At first he seemed super sweet. He would always send me a text message in the morning, telling me to have a good class, and that he couldn't wait to meet me face to face. And we would FaceTime every night. At first I loved it because I never had a boy give me so much attention, and like I said before, I never dated anyone, so I was just over the moon that he was even interested enough to talk to me. But it started to get annoying. He would text me almost every second of the day and try and FaceTime me at least 4 times. When I wouldn't respond to him, he would ask if I was okay, while I wasn't answering him, if I was seeing another guy. If I was seeing another guy, it would make him really mad if I was. I of course, once seeing the messages, would try and reassure him it was okay and I wasn't seeing anyone. Like I said in the beginning, I was young and naive, so I didn't see the red flags. Things started going downhill, and then they kept going downhill. It came to a point where he started asking for pictures of me, either just selfies or pictures of me in the mirror. I wouldn't send them though, because I wasn't comfortable, and he would brush it off, saying that it was fine, and I could send him pictures of myself to him whenever I was ready. One time I was in class for a long time because it was lab, and it started at 7 PM and wouldn't end until 10 PM that night. For those of you who don't know labs in college, they can last from 2 to 4 hours, and mine just happens to be 3 hours that night. Once class ended, I headed up to my dorm and took out my phone. I clicked the button on the slide lighting on the screen. I had 380 unread texts, 10 missed calls, and 3 voicemails from Sean. Before I could even react or even read all the messages on my phone, it started to ring. Instead of being Sean, it was my dad. He had called me to make sure I was alright because he got an alert from the phone company that I'd gotten all those messages. I was still on the phone plan. I don't know why, but I lied to him and laughed it off, saying I was just in a group chat with a bunch of girls from school. Once I got off the phone with my dad, I quickly went to look at the messages I'd gotten. Most of them were demanding why I wasn't answering him, and he would come find me if I didn't answer him. The voicemails were crude, and most of him saying that he was going to find me, and when he did, he was going to punish me for not answering him. After this, I just completely blocked him on everything, completely freaked out from the whole thing. About a week goes by, I start to slowly forget about the incident and try not to think much of it. At least that's what I was trying to do. That whole week, I felt like someone was watching me, but I brushed it off as just being paranoid. At the end of the week, my roommate Tracy, who I'd been avoiding, comes up to me, shouting at me, saying how I broke Sean's heart, and how he had called her, crying, saying that he can't understand why I stopped talking to him. I couldn't even get a word in because of how fast she was talking. She finally called me a self-centered bitch and walked away. I went to class right after that, not realising I'd forgotten to lock my dorm room. You see, I lived with 4 girls and each girl had their own room which would lock from the outside with a key. Well, when I came back from class, I noticed my door was cracked open slightly. My heart dropped into my stomach. I hesitated going in, my hands were shaking terribly, but I finally got the nerve to push it open. Nothing. There was nothing out of place, it seemed. Even though there was nothing out of place, I could have sworn I closed the door before leaving the class. No, I don't remember if I locked it or not. I know for sure that I closed the door. So I asked my roommates, including Tracy, if anyone had gone into my room today, and they all denied it, even Tracy. But I knew in my heart that someone had been there. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't. So one weekend, when I knew that all my roommates were going to be out of town, I switched dorm buildings and roomed with a girl that I'd gotten to be close friends with. After I moved in there, I told her all that happened, and she said that she would walk with me to my classes, which thankfully we had most of our classes together except for the night lab I had, and she would walk with me to my lab and wait until my lab was done to walk me back to the dorm. One night though, she had gone out of town to see her parents or something. I was walking back from my lab, and it had gone really late that night again. I heard someone walking behind me, but I didn't pay any kind to it since class would just let out. But as I was walking, I could hear the steps getting closer, so I started to pick up my walking speed. At this point, I could tell someone was following me, and I was afraid to look back. As the footsteps increased and got faster, I started running as fast as I could. Now let me tell you, I'm not athletic by any means. Somehow though, adrenaline probably, I was able to sprint to my dorm building, hearing someone still running behind me, and I thankfully already had my key out to get into the building, and I swiped on the door and slammed it behind me. Looking up from the slammed door, I see someone who's probably about 10 feet away from the door staring at me. Even though the person's hoodie was up and I couldn't see their face, I could just tell they were looking at me, and I just knew it was Sean. Not wasting any time, I go up to the RA that was up that night, bawling, telling him what had just happened. He called the police and I told them what happened, but basically they said they couldn't do anything since I didn't see his face, and even I thought it was Sean, and maybe I was just paranoid since it was nighttime and I was just walking by myself. After all this, I called my friend and told her what happened, and she never went out of town again if I had any late classes. Eventually, I decided college wasn't for me and I dropped out. I moved back to my home state and went to cosmetology school and became a hairdresser. I still haven't dated anyone yet though. Maybe it's the fear of something like that happening again. I'll never know. I do know that I'm super careful with who I talk to now and who I give my social media and phone number to. I'm still scared to go to places by myself though, even though it's been years and I'm states away. Even so, Sean, let's never meet again. I live in a small town in South Africa. Near my town, there's this large patch of woods, and since the outbreak of coronavirus, I haven't been in the woods for a long time, until yesterday. So my friend called me to ask if I wanted to join him and a few other mates to play a game of paintball in the woods, and obviously I was keen. I got my paintball gear and gun and headed off into my mate's place. There were 6 of us: Chase, Liam, Matt, Stephen, and obviously me, and also Joey. We headed off into the woods, but made a few stops to fill up on petrol and get some gas for the paintball guns. When we finally got to the woods, we parked the cars, got in our gear, and ventured into the forest to find the perfect spot to paintball. Eventually, we got deep enough into the area with sufficient cover and space to play a good game of capture the flag. We played a couple of games since it was winter. It got dark really quickly, but we planned for this and brought our flashlights and decided to play a couple of night games, which is extremely hard, especially in the forest we were in. During one match, Joey and I decided to sit out because we were both tired and needed a quick breather, and the others continued to play from a significantly good distance away. While we were chilling, I was rolling up a joint, here I'm a pothead, and Joey went to go take a piss a couple of meters away from me. While I was busy rolling, I had the flashlight pointing towards myself since there was no other light to allow me to see what I was doing and what was around me. It was completely dark. I couldn't even see 2 meters ahead of myself because of how dark it was. Suddenly, I heard footsteps coming my way, but I thought it was just Joey, and I soon realised I couldn't see any light from his flashlight, so now I was more vigilant, but still relaxed, thinking he's trying to play a prank on me or something. But the footsteps stopped a few meters away from me, so I lifted up my flashlight and pointed it in the direction of where I heard the footsteps and scanned the area, but just saw bushes and trees and thought it might be Joey hiding in the bushes or behind a tree waiting to give me a jump scare. Then I heard footsteps coming in the opposite direction, and when I looked, I could see it was Joey because he was holding a flashlight. That's when I stopped what I was doing and picked up my flashlight and paintball gun, and when Joey reached me, I whispered, "Bro, there's someone over there." And Joey obviously didn't believe me and just said to me to stop being a baby. But he soon regretted saying that because I decided to do one last scan of where I heard the footsteps, and to my horror I saw someone peeking and staring straight at me from behind a tree, probably 10 or 11 meters away from us. I just shouted, "What the actual hell?" And when Joey heard me say this, he looked at me, and then when the man looked and instantly jumped up, picking up his paintball gun also. We stared at each other for at least 2 minutes, but it felt like forever until he stepped out from behind the tree. He was a large man, at least 6 foot, was honestly filthy like he hadn't had a bath in years. He was wearing baggy, ripped up jeans and an old dirty zip-up bomber jacket, plus we could see that he was on something, or he was just batshit crazy and he was holding something behind his back. He finally said, "What are you guys doing out here since it's so dark?" We couldn't even answer him because of the shock we were in. Joey started with fear in his voice. "We're just leaving." But the man nodded his head in disagreement and said, "No, you're not. Your friends are still playing the game." I felt a shiver down my spine. "How about we play a little game of our own while we wait for your friends?" And this is when he finally showed us what he was hiding behind his back. It was a large machete. That's when I knew we had to get out of there. So I aimed my paintball gun at him in the toughest way I could muster up. I told him, "Leave now or I'll shoot." Even though I only had about 6 or 7 paintballs loaded, and Joey did the exact same thing by aiming his gun at the man, even though he had no paintballs in his gun. But he didn't even flinch, but did something that honestly made my skin crawl. He just smiled and said, "The game starts now." And suddenly he just rushed us. So I told Joey to run while I fired my last bullets at him. And luckily I shot him in his head, which caused him to fall, so that was our chance to book it, and I linked up with our friends. As soon as we started running, we heard footsteps again, and he was actually gaining on us. We could barely see, but we couldn't slow down because we knew what would happen if we did, so we just carried on sprinting with all of our hearts until we heard other paintball guns being fired, so we knew we were close. Joey started shouting to get everyone's attention all of a sudden, I heard a huge thud. Joey tripped and twisted his ankle. I turned around to help him, and when I did, I could see the man running full sprint towards us. In that moment, I thought it was going to be the end of us. But our friends heard us scream for help and rushed to us, and when they saw the man, they just started firing at him, and he knew he wasn't going to be able to take all of us on, so he just decided to turn around and disappear into the forest. We helped Joey up, rushed to get all of our stuff, and rushed to the cars. When we got to my friend's place, we helped Joey treat his ankle, and I proceeded to tell my friends everything that happened, and they were all creeped out. It's safe to say that the next time I'm in those woods, I'm going to have to be a lot more vigilant. So, this happened a year ago, and I'm still pretty shaken by this whole event. I thought I'd tell my story. I live in the UK and it's autumn, and it gets dark around 4 PM. There was a school autumn break that week, so all the kids are at home, so that means my girlfriend's brother was home too. I'd been with her a year at this point, so her family knew me pretty well, and her brother enjoyed my company. She'd recently been pretty stressed out. Her parents were going across country for the day, so she had to look after her brother, but I thought that I'd give her the day to herself so she can just cool off. I asked her parents if I could look after their son for the day instead, and they agreed. So I came around 8 AM, and they let me in before they set off. My girlfriend's brother woke up about an hour later, and she followed shortly afterwards. We went out for breakfast at a local cafe together, and went back to her house when we were done, and once I dropped her off, I took her brother to the park. We got there at about 2 PM, and the place was pretty packed. Eventually, the sun started going down, and the place was completely empty by 4 PM. I texted my girlfriend and told her we'd be home in a bit, and she said okay. I'm gonna be honest, I completely lost track of time. Me and her brother were having fun being the only two in the park. Me and her brother were stood up on this really tall climbing frame with a slide on it. It was almost pitch black at this point, so I was using my phone as a flashlight. A notification popped up on my screen, and it was my girlfriend asking where we were. I responded, "Oops, coming home now," and told her brother we had to go. He sighed and asked if we can go down the slide, so I said yes. Before I went down, I knew what the park looked like. There were streetlights all around it, benches everywhere, some trees, and places for kids to play. When I came out the slide, there was something weird. A man had appeared out of nowhere and was stood beneath one of the streetlights. He had a trench coat on and a beanie hat. I immediately got my girlfriend's brother behind me and called out to the man with a friendly, "Hi there." I got a response. He started groaning. I noticed that he was swaying back and forth in the light, and he had his mouth open, drooling with a blank look in his eyes. This made me feel really uneasy. I picked the little bro up and kept checking on this guy the entire time. There was an exit to the left that led to a path back home, so I left out that way and kept checking behind me every few seconds. The guy was still stood there. The path where the guy was stood merges with a big main path if you walk out through some bushes, and so does one I walked through. I was walking down the path for about 2 minutes, periodically checking behind me, and thought I was in the clear. I wasn't. I was on a straight stretch of path with lots of streetlights when I saw him again. He was stood beneath one, looking up at it, and he was playing with something in his hands. I looked a little closer, and I realised it was a knife. I kept walking and walking, checking behind me constantly. My girlfriend's little brother was so scared he had his head tucked into my chest. I noticed that the guy seemed to be moving into the streetlights whenever I turned around. Initially, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then I started counting them and realised the 2 streetlights behind him had definitely turned into 5. I could faintly hear the groaning noise, and he was occasionally moaning as well. I picked up the pace and turned the corner, getting closer to the last stretch of street before I got to my girlfriend's house. That was when I heard him behind the rows of bushes. That moaning noise really sounded angry now, and I heard heavy footsteps bounding down the path. The man was absolutely running. I had immediately broke into a sprint and didn't stop until I turned an alleyway at the front of the street and got behind my girlfriend's house. There's a big bush there, so I crouched down behind it and spammed her phone with messages to open the back gate. I hugged her rather close until she opened it for us and got us in quickly. It felt like years. I went to the front of the house and it confirmed that I'd managed to shake him. He was now in the street, circling where I'd been, outside the alleyway just moments ago. He was still moaning. He had that knife in his hand still. He started kicking people's bins over. I called the police immediately, but he was gone by the time they arrived, and as far as I know, they never found him. There was a similar incident near the area a few months ago I saw on Facebook, but I don't think anything came of that either. Her parents thanked me for keeping their son safe and didn't hold any ill will against me for the situation. He went back to normal pretty much the day afterwards, but he still had nightmares about the event. When my country isn't in lockdown, I'm allowed to look after him with my girlfriend, funnily enough, but we haven't been to that park ever since, and I still check over my shoulder and break into a cold sweat every time I'm alone in the street. So I've recently discovered this page and thought I'd share my story here. I'm not sure if this belongs here, but I don't know if it would fit anywhere else. So I lived in a pretty nice area with my husband and some family friends. We lived there for a few years with nothing bad happening around us. It felt like a very safe neighbourhood. Now for context, I'm a very short white female and considered disabled even though I look fine, but I could never really beat anyone up since my disability has limited my activity severely. Anyway, on to the story. This happened about a year before we moved, and I had some stories pop up on Facebook of some traffickers that were targeting women and children at the local store that we live right behind. I was freaked out, and so I made it a point not to go to the store without my husband. I still got the news articles about people being followed and grabbed and kidnapped from the store, but I felt pretty safe as long as I didn't go anywhere without my husband. I was going to work one day. I worked about 15 minutes away from my house. It was a call centre kind of out in the middle of nowhere. There were fields every which way. I worked at the afternoon shift and was one of the last people to leave at night. I had to stop and get gas and was a little freaked out because I was scared to go anywhere without my husband, but I wasn't going to make it to work and back home, so I had no choice. I stopped at the station and was slightly relieved that it was super busy. I got out and pumped my gas when this big van pulled up in the spot next to mine. A guy got out and started pumping his own gas, then he walked around the pump and got in between my car and me. He smiled and said, "Wow, your car's so clean. How'd you get it so clean?" I was flabbergasted at the question. My car was a mess. It was dirty with bugs and stuff on it. "Why don't you show me how you get it so clean?" He reached out to touch me, but I jerked back. Another car pulled up behind me and the guy got out. I think he freaked the guy out because he walked back to his van. I quickly finished pumping my gas and got into my car, locked the doors and sped away. A few minutes later, I look out my window and the van is behind me, riding my bumper pretty much. I could see the guy smiling and laughing with some other guy. I was pretty freaked out, but figured he was going to the freeway. We passed the freeway, but he kept following me. Now I was really freaked out. The only place on the road now is my work. I called my husband, but he didn't answer since he was at work. I was freaking out, so I just picked up the speed and continued to work. I kept looking back, and the van was still there, but just a little bit further back. I made it to work. It was a large building with lots of cars in the parking lot. I parked right at the front of the doors, in a handicapped spot, and ran into the doors. I looked back through the doors and I saw the guy stopped in front, looking pissed. I ran up to my department and went right up to a friend who was an ex-military guy. He carried a couple of guns on him at all times. I cried as I told him what happened. I got to work and was still freaked out all day. We closed and I was walking down to my car. I peeked out the windows and that's when I saw the white van. I couldn't see anyone in there and I wasn't even sure if it was the same van. I ran back to my department and told my friend what was going on. He pulled out his gun and walked me outside. The van had now moved right behind my car. My friend walked me to his car, and we got in, and he drove me right up to my car. Then he followed me all the way home and sat outside until I was inside the house. I could see the van following us, but once we got past the freeway, he turned onto it. The next afternoon on my way to work, I passed a gas station and the van pulled out. Again, they followed me to work, but then turned away once I got to the parking lot. This went on for about a week. They would follow me to work, leave, then be outside when I was leaving, and my friend would walk me out. My body told me that they were probably trying to learn my schedule so they could figure out a time to jump me. He insisted that I take one of his guns, just in case he wasn't there at work to walk me out. I didn't want it though, as I was afraid that if I had it, then I'd get pulled over for something and get in trouble for having a gun not in my name and not having a permit for it. I was telling my husband that evening and how his van was still following me, and he suggested that I should call the cops and let them know. I honestly don't know why I didn't think of that. So the next morning, when I was about to get ready for work, I called. I told them everything. Then I left for work. Just like clockwork, the van pulled out of the gas station and started following me. We were on the long stretch of road that nothing was on when I spotted a car parked off to the side of the road. I passed, and then the car passed, and then the lights came on. The van was pulled over. I later found out that the men following me had several warrants for rape and attempted kidnapping. The back of the van had knives, ropes, gloves, masks, chloroform, and some other sketchy crap in it. The cops believed that I was going to be their next target. When I got to work, my friend wasn't there. He was sick. I'm so glad that I called the cops that morning, because I don't think I would have made it home if he wasn't there to walk me out. Anyway, that's my creepy story. I hope you guys liked it. It's 100% true. We have since moved out and I live in a not as nice area, but so far I haven't noticed any creepy people around, but I always carry pepper spray whenever I go out. When I was 13, I broke my leg in a nasty bicycle accident. I ended up in a plaster cast from my hip to my ankle for 8 weeks. As it was coming up to Christmas, my younger brother wanted to go to the theatre to see the Christmas show. I was 13, moody and accompanied with a bright pink cast everywhere I went. I was not feeling it. My dad, never one for going to the theatre, offered to take me to Pizza Hut instead. It was a rare opportunity to spend time with my dad, who had often been working very long hours. He worked as a police officer, which at the time, I didn't really take an interest in what he did. We had a great evening, and we came back to the car with full bellies and some leftover pizza. I remember babbling away to my dad, as I had been the whole night, enthralled to have my dad's undivided attention. After a while, I noticed he wasn't really responding anymore. We were fairly near home, but still on the main roads before we turned off to our housing estate. At first, I thought he'd just lost interest, but I glanced across and noticed that he was permanently looking in the rearview mirror. I asked what was up, and he said, "That car behind us has been following us all the way from Pizza Hut." I glanced behind and commented that we were still on the main roads, and I couldn't see that this was an unusual route for this guy to take. He said I need to see wherever he is. I don't want to lead this guy to our house. I rolled my eyes. My dad was always paranoid about this kind of stuff. We wouldn't even tell our friends we were going on holiday because he was convinced the house would get broken into whilst we was away. We were coming up to a residential area before ours that I knew from doing a newspaper round. I suggested the street coming up on the left, as it loops around in a horseshoe shape through an estate and brings you back out to the same main road we was on, just further up. Nobody would take this road to come out onto the main road again. My dad turned off, and so did the car. I will never forget that feeling, that sinking feeling as I watched the car sharply turn behind ours. The car placed its full beams on. I let out a gasp and I looked at my dad. He'd gone into work mode. He had completely shut me out. He accelerated down the street, and as we came to the main road, I saw there were many cars still on the main road. He pulled straight out onto the main road, meaning the car coming on the main road needed to brake sharply and held down their horn at us. I kept my eyes on the road ahead of us, breathing deeply as my dad weaved in and out of the lanes. A part of me was completely terrified, and a part of me was still convinced that this wasn't really happening. that he had exaggerated or mistaken this. He wasn't really following us. I dared to look in the side view mirror and saw it was a different car behind us. I felt myself relax a little. We turned left at the coming roundabout, giving very little room to anyone, and a few moments of holding my breath, thinking we were going to hear the sound of metal on metal. The street we had turned onto was slightly quieter than the road previous. I slowly glanced into the side mirror, and it was a different car behind us. I sighed relief and thought that it had been really my dad's imagination. Suddenly, the rearview mirror became a little bit more illuminated again, and I awkwardly turned in my seat to see a car pull out sharply from behind the car behind us and pull quickly into behind our cars again. I looked at my dad again. He grabbed his phone from his pocket and told me to call someone in particular in his phone and put it on speaker. My hands were shaking. I could barely press the buttons. A cheerful voice answered before he could say anything else, and my dad quickly summarised what's happened. There was a pause. I could hear the voices speaking in the background, radios beeping and answering through radios. My dad barked at me to keep naming the streets we were on to the guy on the phone, as my dad randomly turned down the streets, trying to keep to the main roads. I'm randomly calling names and trying to remember to see the direction we was heading in. The car was so close behind us and completely blinding any view behind us. All I could think was please don't hit us. If we crash, we can't run. What the hell can I do? My leg had only just been blasted. I knew I stood no chance. I suddenly wondered if they were getting close enough to take a shot at us. This, for me, was unthinkable. It was England. This isn't the norm. Why the hell would someone shoot us? We continued to weave down streets and random turns as I tossed around in the front seat, clutching onto the mobile in my trembling hands. The voice on the phone shouted, "Turn into the Tesco car park that's coming up on the left. We have 3 response vehicles coming from the other direction." My dad sharply turned into the car park, skipping the red light. I shut my eyes, again, waiting for the sound of metal on metal. As we swung into the empty car park near, the car behind us was in close pursuit. Blue lights surrounded our car for what felt like all directions. The sound of sirens was deafening. My dad got straight out of the car and ran behind the car. I screamed, thinking someone could have a gun, and tried to look over my shoulder to see, when my door swung open and a police officer was crouching into the car to help me get out. My arms were complete jelly, and I couldn't even use the crutches to help me stand. Another police officer came between them and helped me as I hopped to the back of the police car. They were kind and tried to distract me as I was trying to see what was going on and where my dad was. I couldn't really see from my ankle, and I also couldn't turn properly due to my leg. They did their best to reassure me, and one had clearly just been through the nearby McDonald's drive-thru and offered me his tea. I just sobbed, begging them to tell me what was going on. My dad, after some time, came over to the car and told them to take me home. He had checked, and my mum was back home with my brother. As the police car turned around in the car park, back towards the entrance, we could see the police surrounding the vehicle, and 3 men who looked to be in their late 20s were handcuffed, leaning over the car, whilst a sniffer dog and 2 police officers were taking things out of the car, one of which was a baseball bat. When my dad got home late that night, I asked him what that was all about. Who the hell were those men, and why were they following us? He was very reluctant to tell me anything. He did admit it was because of him that they were following us. He explained that he was in a drugs team that dealt with, how I understand this as an adult, the interception of large shipments of drugs that were being transferred across the country, and sometimes people lost a lot of money when they were caught. I just stared at him. I had no idea what to say. He just shrugged and said, "Sometimes people get upset about that." I was on a date in Camden with a girl who, from photos, I wasn't overly excited about, but in the flesh made my eyebrows shoot off my head. She was really pretty and smart and funny. We had quite a few cocktails, and I think it was the Blues Kitchen, before going to the gay bar in Camden, which had since closed down. I think it was called the Black Cap. The day was going well, and we meet these people who join in our table. And the guy tells me at the bar my date said she wanted me to kiss her. I did, and it turned out the guy was just helping us out by moving things along. My date was really shocked and told me it was bold, but she liked it. She came back to my hotel room with me, which was like a 10-minute walk away. The room was kind of small but cool, with a space age sort of style to it. We were both drunk and made out a lot. She started crying about problems she was having with a friend who was really sick and her job that was really stressful, full on sobbing. She left in embarrassment, even though I wasn't worried about her leaving like that, but she said she'd be okay. As she left, I saw a large man in a black thick leather jacket in the corridor. He was staring at my date as she left, and then stared at me as I closed the door. I was pretty wasted, so after checking my date got on a bus, I had a nap and was woken by banging on the door. I ignored it, but then it just kept going, so I staggered up to the door and opened it a crack. I recognised the leather elbow and arm as the door was shoved open violently. I was drunk, and the jolt of the door caused me to fall over. Luckily, the room entrance was small and around the width of the door, so my back was against the wall by the door, whilst my feet touched the other wall. My body kept the door closed as this man kept shoving against the door. I managed to get it closed again, locked it, and went to sleep as I was still drunk. When I woke up in the morning, I thought I'd dreamt the man at the door, but when I looked up and down the side of my ribs, my hips and my thigh, I had dark bruises. I was really lucky, and I'm so glad that my room was tight on space, because if it hadn't, that guy would have got in so easily. I'm a female college student, and I live with my family in an apartment in a big city. Where I come from, it's pretty normal just to go to the college near your house. This happened on a weekend when my family and I had planned a trip abroad, but last minute I had an exam rescheduled for that Monday, so I decided not to go. So it was Thursday, and my parents and siblings are leaving for the airport, and the guy that they usually hire is taking them to the airport. My mum tells me my maid is staying with me for the weekend, and that I should call her if I need anything. I say goodbye and get back to studying. So it's now late Thursday, around 9 PM, and I'm studying in the living room with my boyfriend. So my maid tells me that it's getting late, so she's going to bed, so I tell her that I'm also going to bed soon. An hour later, my boyfriend leaves. It's now around 10:30 PM and I'm getting ready for bed. I grab my dog, a small Yorkie, and take her to my room to sleep with me. So it's now 11 PM and I'm in bed looking at my notes when my dog starts growling at the door. Well, I tell her to shut up because Yorkers are nervous and bark all the time, at least mine does. So after she's silent, I get this adrenaline rush and stay very still and hear footsteps in the corridor. The floor is made of wood, so when I hear a specific creak, the sounds of sort of wood bending, I know the steps are getting near to my room. So at first I think it's probably my maid, making sure my boyfriend didn't stay over. But when the footprints stop at my door, I started to freak out. I was even compelled to say my maid's name. "He's not here, you can come and check." But somehow, I just knew it wasn't her. So I call my boyfriend and tell him someone's in the house. He tells me to put some shoes on and check the other rooms. I really don't want to, but I'm not going to sleep until I'm sure no one's there. I find some courage and put on some shoes and start walking very slowly towards my sister's room and checking with my phone light to see it's empty. Their bathroom's empty, my parents' room's empty. By this time I'm getting more relaxed and thinking I must have just imagined it. Then I go to my parents' bathroom and it's also empty. So I walk to their house closet and I scan the room with my phone light when I shed a light on a human figure. And it's obviously not my maid, but I say her name and the tall muscular body answers, "No, it's," then a guy's name, the driver that took my parents to the airport. I freeze and try and act cool. He invents some petty excuse. I was checking the windows were closed. I tell him it's late and he leaves the house and I call my parents to verify his excuse. He was obviously lying. And then he has the audacity to ask me via WhatsApp if I want him to drive me to college tomorrow. I never saw him again, and I really hope I don't meet him again. So, I'm a French student, and I study at university in the UK. It's a campus university, meaning the university and its affiliated buildings are centred in an area outside the city. As a second year student, I live in the nearest town to the campus, which is 20 minutes away from the bus or cars. The town I live in is relatively nice, even though the north part is much nicer and safer than the south. Me and my 7 roommates live in a 10-bedroom house in the north side. Even though it's a relatively nice town, it's kind of known for sketchy people sometimes hanging around anywhere in town, and there's an alarming amount of crime for such a small town. However, I was never too worried until now. A couple of weeks ago, I was coming home from a coffee date with a friend of mine. I was on my way home, crossed the street to my doorstep, and I was pulling my keys out of my pocket, and a guy interrupted me. I turned around, and a man was standing there. He was probably 5'10" or something, like around 23 years old, and wasn't too built, honestly. At first I thought he was a delivery man, because one of my roommates was expecting an Amazon order, and she asked me to get it for her. He started talking. "Sorry for bothering you, I saw you walking from over there, crossing the street. You have something attractive in your walk." At this point, I just assumed he was some random guy trying to flirt with me. He then asks, "Are you Spanish?" It's a question I get often, and this man didn't look too harmful. I just answered, "No, I'm French." He then tried to engage in a conversation with me by asking how long I've been in the UK for, why do I speak such good English, and what do I study. At this point, I thought it was super sketchy, so I was half answering his questions, desperately wanting to get inside my house. Suddenly this man asks, "Is this a house of all girls?" And this is what alarmed me. Why would he even ask that to a random girl? So I reply with the truth. "No, there's 4 boys and 4 girls." He then seems quite unsettled and asks if I know his friend that used to live here last year, so I say no. He then says he'll leave me to it and to take care and have a good day, and finishes with, "I'll see you soon." I'm not one to panic easily, but when I came home, I immediately went to my roommates, let's call them Brooke and Mia, to tell them what happened. As I finish my story, Mia looks at Brooke and then back to me, and I just knew something was up. Then Mia goes, 2 days ago, I was coming home from the store, and I could sense that someone was following me. At some point, he came up to me, and he matched the exact description of the guy that I was just talking to. Mia, Brooke and I were just plain worried at this point. Mia said he wanted to talk to me and wouldn't listen when I asked him to leave me alone because I have a boyfriend, and he left once I got home and shut the door in his face. This meant that this man, assuming it's the same guy, followed Mia to this house, and he was also hanging around this place when I came home. When the 4 boys came home, we told them all what happened, just to make sure that if anything was to occur, there was a backstory. Every time I go out the house and come back, I look around to see if this man's around. We never saw him again until a couple of days ago. We received an alert from the Students' Union saying that a young woman had disappeared in the south of the town. They suspected a kidnapping, so they was urging everyone to be careful. We didn't hear much about it for a couple of days, until they found the woman's body near Riverside one morning. A couple of hours later, they caught the guy and released his picture. It was the man who was at my doorstep. I don't think it's entirely sunk in what happened, or in this case, didn't happen to me, but it's still disturbing knowing that that poor woman could have been me, or even my roommate. Even though the man's been caught, I still look around my block whenever I leave home, or when I come home. So, looking into my past, I realised I've had a few stories that could fit into the subreddit. This one I think about a lot, and how my life could have changed in a split second so easily. At the time I was quite young, maybe around 6 or 7, but I remember it so perfectly. I was in central London for the day with my family, and it was getting to the evening, so we began heading home. We didn't live too far out from central London, so we were just going to get a taxi to the nearest station and head back from there. Being so young, inexperienced with the world, and plain stupid, when we got out of the taxi at the train station, I thought it was custom to wave goodbye to the taxi drivers as they drove off. Yeah, stupid. So after I finished waving goodbye to this complete stranger of a taxi driver, I turned around and saw my family completely gone, vanished out of thin air. I was so young, I had no idea what had just happened. They just suddenly weren't anywhere to be seen. Being a short kid, everyone was like giants at that age, and it was absolutely terrifying. At that moment, everything I ever learned about stranger danger completely went out the window and no longer mattered. I was just terrified. So I remember choosing to sit in the middle of the pavement and do the only thing that I knew how to do, and just cry, hoping my parents would soon find me. "Are you okay?" I looked up to the side and saw a man sat on the bench next to me, but sat in the way where his bum was on the backrest bit and his feet were on the seat, making him completely tower over me. I remember the image of him so clearly. "I've lost my family. Let me help you find them," he said. I can't remember the exact conversation very well, except for the next thing he said. "I think I saw them go this way. Follow me." That line has stuck with me ever since. He stood up and took a hold of my hand and started leading me down the road. Completely oblivious, and just glad that I had an adult with me now, I just calmly went with him. Just as he was about to lead me around the corner of the building, I heard a voice call my name. My brother, only being 2 years older than me at the time, had come running out of the train station and seen me just before I completely disappeared out of sight around the corner into a random London road. A few seconds later running outside, and there's no way he would have seen me. My parents followed, and I quickly ran out too, grabbing me away from the man, making sure I was okay. I don't remember what happened to the man after that. Part of my memory says he quickly ran away after my family got me. Another part tells me that he stayed and explained to my parents his course of events. None of us really remember. I just know that I'm so lucky that I didn't go around that corner with him. I always think about how different my life could have been if I did. Thinking about it, the station entrance was only a few metres from where I'd sat down to cry. It wasn't that busy. The man must have seen my family going to the station, but that's one thing I'll luckily never know the answer to.
I've always had trouble dating, as all of my relationships end in utter defeat. As bad as they are, though, I'm someone who can't stay single for the life of me. It's a real problem. My first relationship started just after high school. It was one of the tamest breakups, too. The girl's name was Tiffany, and we had met each other outside of school, and eventually got together. Nothing too bad went on in that relationship, except for the constant running around she did. She was oblivious to what she was doing and what a relationship meant. She'd make fun of me for getting jealous, like I wasn't supposed to feel that way, for her spending more time with anyone else. I decided to break it off after a few months of this. I couldn't take it anymore. She would constantly rush off and be with other guys and tell me I'm being controlling, when I'd tell her it made me feel like she didn't like me anymore. Once that relationship ended, I did not date until I was out of high school. I finished up sad and lonely. So, after high school, were a few girls I went through. The first one was after I got kicked out of my parents' house for being 18. I had a girl move in with me to my first apartment and help with bills. We ended up sleeping together and eventually dating. It came on quick and felt natural. Her name was Mary, and she was a very sarcastic person. I lived with her for a long time and got really close to her. She'd constantly pick on me for being sensitive to her jokes. She'd make a joke like she's got other guys lined up ready to take her away and tell other people that I'm small. It was really uncomfortable. She finally said this in front of everyone I know and everyone she knows, and I got tired of it. I blew up on her at home, and she acted like I was doing something wrong. She got mad at me for defending myself, and when I told her I was tired of her making fun of me and spreading lies about me, she called me a pussy and said I was being too sensitive. I'm sorry if I can't take one insult after another. She moved out of my apartment, and I fell into a depression after that. The place started piling up with trash and clothes everywhere. I stopped really taking care of myself and things got bad. I talked to a friend for therapy and somehow got over myself and got back to near normal. He even helped come over and clean my nasty place. I started getting desperate a little bit later and heard about a dating app called Tinder. Tinder felt like a golden opportunity to get some real date with no strings attached. Maybe it would have been if I knew what to look for. I was stupid and would take anyone. I got on the app and found a girl I liked. She was cool, and she wanted to meet up with me after talking for a few days. So for all I knew, she could have been a crazy person, but I didn't care or so much as think about it. I made plans with her to meet up at a local bar. She was absolutely late and made me wait around the bar for an hour before she showed up. I didn't mind that at the time, but she did this all the time. I dated this one, which I forgot her name, for about 6 months. She was cute and great to be around, but I couldn't handle her either being late all the time and the problems that caused, or just standing me up altogether because something else was more important than plans we had. She could have at least told me that she was standing me up all the time, but instead, I'd sit there long enough to know she wasn't just going to be late, she wouldn't be coming at all. I had enough of that and got back on Tinder. I decided to give it back to her and not even tell her that I was breaking up with her. She'd find out when I didn't talk to her anymore. I believe that was fitting, given the situation. The next Tinder date messaged me and asked me out. She was actually everything I was looking for in a girl. She wasn't mean and abusive. She did exactly what she said she was going to do, and she didn't have plans to ruin me. She had her own place. She was renting for another year before her agreement was up. We'd seen each other for a year before we started having problems, and it was because she started getting distant. I found out why. She'd told me, one of my friends through Facebook, that she only loved me for what I was going to have later on. I was completely broken when I saw this. Basically, her plan was that she was going to get with me, and when my parents died and I got my inheritance, she'd be rich. I don't know how she found out I even had that coming, which I don't want that time to ever come, but what she didn't know was it wasn't going to be much of anything. My parents were humble in what they had and didn't have super high paying jobs, hence why they kicked me out at 18. I had all the time that I was a lazy 16-year-old who didn't have a job to help support. This isn't what this story is, though. So, I showed her the messages I had from her and told her that if she was looking to get rich off of me, she would be sadly mistaken. She disappeared shortly after that and stopped talking to me. She blocked me on social media, and that was that. I still see her around from time to time, and she gives me dirty looks, like I did something wrong. The next girl I dated from Tinder was someone who decided her only personality was whatever anime she'd watched the day before. I thought it was cool that she watched anime as well, but even 3 weeks of this got really tiring. She'd always pick the most annoying character to imitate. As if that wasn't enough, she made me really uncomfortable because she would act a third her age and make some really fucked up jokes about it. Needless to say, she didn't work out at all. The last and final girl I dated pushed her way in. Tinder really fucked up this one matching us up. So, as soon as I messaged her a few weeks after meeting her, she was in distress, and what she made it seem like she told me that her ex had kicked her out and she needed to get off the streets. Red flag number 1, she should have been that when I picked her up. She came out of the house with bags packed after hearing yelling inside. I didn't put 2 and 2 together and figured this out. The stress of helping someone out got to me and clouded my judgment. I didn't even think to say anything. When she put her kid in the car, I drove her back to my house, and she made herself right at home. In the coming months, she never got a job. Her kid was allowed to do whatever he wanted and destroyed the house. and the bills started piling up. She just sat on her ass and ate. I asked her many times to get a job and she refused, saying she couldn't. I asked her one day to leave and she would not. At some point I wasn't with her anymore, but for some reason she wouldn't believe that I didn't want to be with her anymore. I tried to keep the peace, but she'd always make up something from thin air to bitch at me about. No wonder her ex was kicking her out when I met her. I had to borrow money from a friend to get her out because I was told I had to evict her. After she was finally gone, I was more broken than I'd ever been. My parents were oddly supportive, as they had really never been before now. They told me if I wanted to come back and live with them, I could. I decided not to. I wasn't going to put myself in the position of potentially getting kicked out again. I have been alone ever since. I brought a dude in to help me pay the bills and get ahead, but we have a rule that as long as we are living here, we won't be bringing girls home. Tinder is now off the table for me forever. I'll deal with the crazies around my area that I find in real life, not the ones that I find on a website that are potentially more crazy. If I didn't know better, I'd say I found a psycho on Tinder. My first boyfriend I met on Tinder, and he seemed okay at first, but when it all went wrong in the long run, I decided I was going to try my hand at online dating, and I wish I did not. I messaged a few guys I thought would be cool to be with, but a lot of them just came back with one night stand requests and other favors they probably wouldn't return. Alan was a guy I met after all those though, and he messaged me with real words, not just, "Hey baby," or some shit like that. When I messaged him back, he introduced himself in a joking kind of way. He seemed so nice. I liked the jokey mood he was always in, and I got really into him. I talked to this guy for nearly a year before I brought it up. I'd been wanting to meet him in real life. There's just something about meeting someone in real life that you know only behind a screen that is just fun and exciting. We said we'd meet up at the mall and get food there, so that's what we did. I got there expecting to see a really tall guy and ended up seeing a really short guy with a mohawk. The mohawk didn't put me off though, it just made his joking image. It wasn't a tall one either, he had to go to work, so we met each other like we were already best friends for a long time and got Chinese food to eat in the food court. We then walked around the mall and he bought me several things. I didn't ask him to, he just did. After that little encounter, he took me for a ride in his car, and we went to a barcade close by the mall. We played a few arcade games there and had a few drinks. When it got dark, he dropped me off at my house, and that was the first date. I had fun, and I was all into it. The thought we were going to have an amazing relationship in the future, it was all I could think about. So later on, through the winter months of the same year, we went on a date with his friends' girlfriends. We all got a little smashed and ended up at a Waffle House at 3 a.m. The Waffle House employees were a little put off by the stupidity that had walked through the door, but they served us anyway. After we were loud and obnoxious inside, we went outside. He had brought his car while drinking. I was told that there would be a designated driver, but there wasn't. Whoever would have been bailed on us. At some point, and I don't remember how it happened, his friends and I were playing around in the parking lot, and he was in the driver's seat with the engine running. I was sitting on the hood of his car, talking to another girl in the group, and he put the car in reverse and backed up fast, making me fall on my face on the ground. As I was trying to get up, he put the car in drive and started bumping me with the car lightly. I thought it was funny the first time, even though it panicked me a little bit. He kept doing it though. He might have been bumping me lightly, but it was hard enough so that my drunk self couldn't stand back up, and I kept yelling at him to stop. At some point, I moved to the right, and he ran over my foot, and I heard a snap. My foot was broken, and I started blacking out. When I didn't get up again for him to bump me, that's when he panicked himself and got out of the car. The next thing I knew, I woke up in the hospital and they were wheeling me in. I was in so much pain, I mumbled for them to fix me, and I woke up later in the car with a cast on. I don't know how long I was out or what happened, but I told him this wouldn't be happening again. He said he understood, and we parted ways for good. He told me that he gets really stupid while he's drinking, almost to psycho level, and he wouldn't be giving that up anytime soon. I had him drop me off at my house and hobble myself inside and deleted my Tinder. I wouldn't be looking on there anymore for anyone else. I've dated since then, but the go out and party all the time lifestyle isn't for me, because if I'm going to end up hurt all the time like that, I need money that I don't have. Thank God I had insurance at the time, but my foot healed up nicely. At the time of this story, I'm single and clear-minded. If you plan to find a real working relationship with no weird shit attached to it, don't use Tinder or any of the other dating apps on your smartphone. They only lead to people that have that one deal-breaking thing you just can't live with. The 80s were a crazy time in my life. I'm not proud to admit I was a major drug addict back then. I've since reformed and have turned my life around. I've been sober since 1990. This story was my wake-up call and is the main reason that I left that life behind. Back then, I was working as a window washer in Birmingham, Alabama. I lived in a small apartment just outside the city. In those days, a lot of contraband came through. I was kinda sort of friends with my dealer. We'll call him Chris. I have known Chris since high school. He was always a bad seed and had a criminal record the length of my arm, which is to be expected in this line of business. We had a sort of standoffish relationship. He tried several times to get me to hang out at parties with him and go to bars and whatnot, but I always declined because I never fully trusted him. However, as my addiction became worse, I began to let my guard down more and more. It was a Friday night. I remember this clearly because I had just gotten paid, and being the pathetic addict I was, I called up Chris as soon as I cashed my check. Hello. Hey Chris, it's Richie. Are we good for a meetup? Yeah, I need you to meet me somewhere else tonight. Why? Because I don't want to get busted selling this shit to you in the same fucking place over and over again. The police came and knocked on my door this morning, accusing me of slinging dope. Oh, shit. Really? Yeah, and it's a good thing I don't keep my stash in my house, or I would have been fucked. But they are watching me, and I think someone is running their mouth. Chris, I'd never... Look, just shut up and drive out to the abandoned church. Be there by 7. Chris abruptly hung up. The church Chris referred to was located roughly 30 minutes outside the city, towards Coburg. I had only been there once back in high school, when a mutual friend of ours had a keg party there. I thought he was overly paranoid. wanting to meet me all the way out there, but I had to play by his rules since he was the one with the supply. I made the drive out there and was sitting in my truck outside the abandoned church, which has nothing but a heap of charred remains, barely standing. That party I mentioned took place in 1981, so someone took it upon themselves to torch the place since then. This was before cell phones, so I pretty much just sat there and listened to the radio while I waited for Chris to show up. I looked at the clock on my dashboard and saw that almost an hour had gone by since I arrived, and there was still no sign of Chris. It was now dark out as well, which was making me feel uneasy. This Chris was off a back road near Interstate 22, which was practically in the middle of nowhere. There were no street lights or anything out there. It was when I was thinking about how if anyone was outside, the only thing they'd see is my truck's cab light, and I started to feel like a sitting duck. I tried starting up my truck to get out of there, but my dumb ass had nearly drained the battery by sitting there with my radio on. As I tried turning the engine over, I got the feeling that eyes were watching me. I turned on my headlights. I looked up, and a wave of dread came over me as my headlights illuminated a horrifying sight. Standing in front of my truck were three figures. The first thing my mind was able to register was a pair of antlers on top of a deer head, and for a split second, I thought maybe a trio of deer were standing in front of my truck. But as I looked closer, I saw the figures were standing upright. Then I came to the horrifying realization that what I was looking at was three men dressed in deer skins. I began to panic and started to turn the key in the ignition. I didn't know who these deerskin wearing freaks were, but I didn't want to stick around to find out. As the sound of the engine failing to start rang out, I watched in terror as the three figures began to move closer. "Come on, you piece of shit!" I yelled as I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, while continuing to try and start my truck. With each attempt, the headlights flickered, and as the figures slowly closed in, I could see that the middle one was holding a shotgun. I closed my eyes and began to pray for God to help me out of this situation while pressing down on the gas pedal. Suddenly, I heard the sound of the engine roaring to life. I didn't have time to be relieved as I quickly threw the vehicle into reverse and hauled ass. I looked up to see that the deer people were much closer than they were before. However, that's not what scared me. What scared me was the shotgun pointed directly at me. Not a second later, I heard a shotgun, and I felt a hard thud as one of my headlights were blown out. I did not stop the truck as I quickly backed out to the back road and then floored it all the way back to town. When I got back home, I immediately called Chris, but there was no answer. The next day I drove out to Chris's trailer and knocked on his door, but no one came. I didn't know what to make of the situation, and I decided to call out of work for a week and lay low. Chris was found 2 weeks later on the side of a road about 15 miles away from the abandoned church. He had been bludgeoned to death. I came to the police with my story and told them about what happened to me. But the death of a known drug dealer wasn't exactly a priority for them. They did, however, try to get me to confess to killing Chris multiple times. Even when I showed them the damage to my truck, I could see the writing on the wall. The police were too lazy to investigate the case, so they tried to pin it on me, using my drug addiction to support their bullshit theory. They harassed me with parking tickets and stakeouts until I finally moved away a year later. I still have no idea who these deer people were, but I'm convinced that they were the ones who killed Chris. My guess is that Chris got to the church before I did, and they ambushed him. To this day, I'm grateful to be alive. The moral of this story is that you should stay away from drugs. Not only will they destroy your life, but they will also put you into dangerous situations like this one. If I were to give this story a title, I'd call it Scared Straight. I've always been a smart kid, never afraid to ask why, until I finally got an answer. One day, I heard the phrase, Amber Alert, and asked my mother. She explained what it meant, as well as the origin of the name. We didn't have much money growing up, and were on WIC for a time. It was even more restrictive than it is now, and I'd frequently had to run to the back of the store, Walmart, for convenience, to swap out for the correct item, and not hold up the line. I was also very independent, and had a watch so my mother could tell me, meet me in the milk section in 10 minutes, and I could go browse the book section as I was easily bored. Due to an incident at a museum years back, my parents instructed me that if I got separated from them, to seek an employee and tell them my parents' names, asking for them to be paged, which I needed to do a few times. This happened back when I was around 7 or 10 years old, in the 90s. On more than one occasion, here is my most vivid memory. I'd saved enough money to buy a toy, and was given permission to go pick one out. Lego was too expensive, but I wanted to look at them anyways first. I'm checking prices, just in case when I hear a voice. It's not Mom or my brother, so I ignore it. I hear it again, and turn around to look. It's an older person. Now, a lot of adults look old to children, but I placed her as older than my mother, at least 40, if not 50. She asked if I was lost. I told her no, and that I knew where my mom was, and that I was just looking. Okay then, she replies, and grabs my arm, and starts to drag me with her. I didn't go to exactly the nicest school, but had been involved in several fights as early as kindergarten. I was later diagnosed with both a mood disorder and PTSD, which helped explain my school problems as well as demonstrate how little help I received. My parents always said to me, after each call from the principal, I shouldn't default to violence, as we were pacifists, which I tried to keep in mind, but my temper still got the best of me. I tell her to let me go. She doesn't listen. I start trying to tug free, and begin yelling that I'm not going to go with her, and that she needs to let me go. She still doesn't let go, so I start hitting her, hand and arm, kicking and beginning to scream for her. A few people walk over and ask what's wrong. I quickly explain, and she finally lets me go. She then claims she was just helping me as I was lost, and I am then scolded by the bystanders for being disrespectful, because clearly the old woman was just lonely and meant no harm. I'm then allowed to leave and run to my mom. I'm more confused than upset at this point and tell her what happened. My mom tells me I went violent and that was wrong, and she didn't seem convinced I was telling the full truth, as I tended to exaggerate back then, but she did believe me that I'd been grabbed. Don't remember if I had bruises or not. Walmart seems to attract some real pieces of work, because I found myself in more than a few similar situations over the years, but both genders and many ages, potential kidnappers of Walmart. Let's not meet. Summer days are different with this pandemic. I'd love to go outside and hang out with my friends, but I shouldn't make the situation worse. I'm all alone in my apartment, and I did regret not coming home to the province. I thought the lockdown wouldn't be this long. Well, you never know. What am I supposed to do? I muttered to myself while lying down in my comfy bed. My routine is pretty much the same with everyone. Eat, rest, tweet, delete, tweet, again, scroll, and sleep. I've considered working out, but I got exhausted just thinking of it. I'm too lazy to read, nor write. I'm common, too common. This boredom might drive me insane, or it already had. I need to find something interesting to work with, otherwise I'd rot in my bed. I don't even have the sense of time, since my body's so out of it. I would normally sleep at 4 or 5 a.m. and wake up at 1 p.m. It's messed up, I know. I should probably learn airbending. Yes, I'm actually serious. Another 2 a.m. Nothing new, I whispered as I scrolled past my timeline. 2:15 a.m., 2:30 a.m., 2:50 a.m., 3 a.m. I finished scrolling, and there's nothing new for Twitter to show. I desperately refresh my timeline, but that's the end. Maybe I should sleep earlier. As I was about to place my phone over the desk, the last refresh popped up, a new tweet. It's a thread about the witching hour. It's a retweet from Lainey. Oh, God, I miss her. Well, this is interesting. The Devil's Hour, or commonly known as the witching hour, is not something to take lightly. This particular hour is filled with ominous and dark presences close that are all of the abyss. That's pretty good, I thought to myself. For a big fan of horror and thriller movies and books, that paragraph, it gave me chills. The thread contained a step-by-step instruction on how to fully experience the witching hour. It only contained 3 replies corresponding to the 3 steps. Pretty short. Well, anything to cure my boredom is fully accepted. The first step is to recite a prayer backwards out loud. I've memorized that prayer enough to visualize its words. It actually sounds pretty creepy when hearing it, and it made sense. It wasn't just a jumble of words. For a moment, I thought that someone else joined me and recited it. I continued the steps, even Gajam didn't make me flinch. So, what can? The second step is to lie on the opposite direction of how you used to sleep and raise your arms as if you are forming a letter T, as if I am an inverted cross. It's a lot more easier than the first step, but this is creepier. I hope the next step won't be to hammer nails on my hands and feet, I said jokingly. I tried to lighten up the mood as everything is so quiet and twisted. The last step is to sleep. Just that. I thought it'd be something scarier. I looked at my phone, and it's already 3:58 a.m. It took that long, as I was sure that I would not be getting any sleep after doing the steps. Minutes later, I dropped and fell asleep. I woke up feeling dizzy. I looked at my phone, and it's 3 a.m. That's fucking insane. I slept for almost a day. That's impossible. No matter how I'd get tired, I should be waking up between 1 and 3 p.m. It can't be because of the thread, right? Maybe it's just a coincidence. I really hope it is. Please. I tried looking for the thread on Twitter, but it's gone. I looked at Laney's recent retweets, but the recent is a week ago. I panicked, and before I knew it, it's 3:57 a.m. Minutes later, I fell asleep. I woke up at 3:26 a.m. It can't be. Shit. I could feel the tense on my body. I'm so scared, I cry. But I immediately held myself together. I try not to think much of the witching hour, but this is the witching hour. I am within the witching hour. But why am I waking up later than before? Why am I sleeping at exactly 4 a.m.? If this continued, would it break the cycle, or would I sleep forever? These questions filled up my mind, and I know I have to do something. I have thought that maybe I could undo the curse if I reverse the steps. I recite the prayer properly, lied on my bed before, and slept at 4 a.m. I woke up at 3:56 a.m. I was stunned. It didn't work. I was crying for a minute, but I stopped myself and looked for another way. I have thought that maybe Laney did it since she retweeted the thread. I have her cell number saved on my phone, and I call her. It took 3 calls for someone to pick up. Hello? Who is this? Hi, I'm Lou. Sorry for calling this late, but I really need to talk to you, Laney. Laney? She died a week ago. She died in her sleep. No, that can't be. That can't fucking be. I hung the phone and cried. I was furious, scared, and hopeless. What am I supposed to do? I shouted, as it was 3:58 a.m. A thought occurred to me that if I should go ask my neighbors for help. I got out of bed, wiped my tears, opened the door, and fell asleep. I woke up at 3:56 a.m., lying on my bed, positioned in an inverted cross. Who placed me here? I'm sure no one even heard me opening my door. The thought is frightening, but I am more scared to do what happens. In the next few minutes, I pick up my phone and immediately saw the thread. There was a 4th step. It claims to undo the curse if I retweeted it. I am desperate, so I did. It's 3:59 a.m. Ha! I'll be saved. I'll be saved, I muttered to myself while slowly drowsing off to sleep.